Carson, I want to open today's show with a shout out to some of our friends, but also I want to make you feel the FOMO because you were out of town and I was at a certain show last weekend at the Wise Hall on Saturday, June 7th, that I know you would have liked to have been at. I'm wearing the merch today.
Oh man, right? The
shorties.
How was it? You didn't get to go.
I did.
Oh, you did get to go. I didn't get to go. I thought you were saying you were at a different show.
Yeah.
Man, I wish I could have been there. How was it?
It was great. You know, there's even a business nerd angle that I can tell you about from this show because you can imagine the vibe. You know the music, You know the people. We've been going to see them. They've now finally put out their debut album, but we've been going to see them for several years when they would do kind of like an annual show. They played at the Wise and there were like 100, maybe 100 plus people there, somewhere around that. So they did pretty good. But here's the thing. So they had an opener as well. And so there was an opening set. There was a set break between the two of them.
Yep.
Then they came on and then we stayed for a long time afterwards as well and socialized. But, you know, there's a break, there's an end, and there's a merch table. And so it's their show and we got the merch table and I've got this shirt, right? So they, at the merch table, they had 2 different colors of t-shirts. They had a third color in sweater. So they had 2 t-shirts and a sweater, all 3 different colors.
Yep.
They had a tote bag and they had some felted things as well. And that's what they had on the merch table. Maybe there was one other thing, but those are the main points from the merch table. Now, they just put out an album.
Yeah.
There were no CDs at the merch table. There were no LPs at the merch table. There weren't even, as there was with one of my clients recently, download cards that were like the size of a small CD sleeve. None of that. None of nothing. No music media on this merch table. They sold out of all their t-shirts.
Very interesting. I mean, that's the true fans model, right? That's like you get people who are just excited to like rep you and, you know, buy your merch and they'll get your music however they want to get your music. That can be if you want to invest upfront in a physical release records or whatever, but really that can be anything. And it's extra great if someone can like rep you and you get word of mouth as people are walking around Vancouver with your cool shirts. That's awesome. I had a good merch table experience on the weekend as well.
Did you?
I went to see a band called Preoccupations, who was from Calgary, formerly kind of a spin-off band of a famous Calgary band, Women, and then formerly called Viet Cong, and now they're called Preoccupations. Opening for them was an LA band called Goon, who I'd never heard of. And this has only happened to me once or twice, but I love it when an opening band is touring and they've got the physical release, but the music isn't out yet. So Goon played this killer first set, and I was like, well, I have to just... And it was like, okay, this record's not out yet, but we've got the vinyl here if anyone wants it. And I was like, yep, sold. I want to listen to that again ASAP. The way to do that, it's the Marine Snow method. I think we talked briefly about the Marine Snow app. But like, There's a little exclusivity. If you're there, you can just like get the physical stuff, you know, I don't know, maybe a month early or something. I don't think it's like crazy early, but if you were... wanting to kind of juice that as much as possible, you could maybe be flogging the album live months before the digital release and push it that way.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And spoiler alert, I'm going to be part of a band that's doing that at the Jazz Fest this year. So not on LP, but you know, we have CDs and I don't know when the release date is, but apparently we're going to have them at the Jazz Fest. So I definitely endorse this tactic. With the shorties, though, I just thought it was such a smart, savvy move and not just doing the same things that you're supposed to do, but, you know, doing something for your people, knowing that you got 100 plus people in your corner because you've built that up, the good vibes over the last several years. And then you can just go clean on what you make. And now they can think about like, oh, how much interest is there if we do second run? And then, you know, you're really running at that point. So kudos to them for delivering on their promise, so to speak, and kind of doing it in a way that we think represents something about how you can carry yourself in this environment successfully.
100%. And I think it speaks so much, like the fact that they sold out speaks to the level of community and that's kind of, what they built, and that's like a good indicator. Love that.
Yeah. Now the Wise Hall, this venue that they played in, it is an example of what the UK government has called grassroots venues. And I found a story from The Quietus this week. This is by Dan McCarthy in The Quietus. The title is Why It's Time to Support Grassroots Venues with a £1 Ticket Levy. So this is a UK-oriented article where they interview an artist who chose to donate £1 per ticket sold at his show or at his tour to something called the Liveline Fund. I think that's how you'd pronounce it, because we're talking about live music as opposed to living your life or something. So you got a chance to check out this article after I sent it to you. I can tell you a bit more about what the Liveline Fund is because I looked into it. Maybe that's a place to start.
Great. Hit me.
So here's what I understand the Liveline Fund to be. It is a partnership between an existing UK charity called the Music Venue Trust. Interestingly, they purchased a venue like the Cultural Land Trust here in Vancouver wishes to do. I wasn't able to quickly ascertain how active that venue is that they bought or whether or not it's lasted, but that shows you the intent of this charity. It is a partnership between them and an advocacy campaign called Save Our Scene, or Save Our Scene UK. And so this venture aims to get venues to charge £1 levies on all tickets in what they call the arena and stadium category. And the Quietus piece specifies that this would probably be shows over 5,000 tickets sold. Now they'll collect this money and it will benefit something called the Live Trust charity. And so venues will apply for funding through Liveline. And this charity will be in charge of processing the applications and handing out funding to what the UK government determines are grassroots venues. So this would be not shows with 5,000 tickets, but probably closer to a couple hundred. I always think it's funny when they talk about these things because I end up living my life like below the line of what these organizations even see. They'll say like, 300 seats, that's tiny. Whereas that would be a massive show for like us. Or
exactly. That's a very funny thing where they're being like, I want to support this size. And you're like, well, there's a lot that happens that's at the 50 cap. Interesting. So is the intent there for the venue to put the levy on or for the artist to like add to the ticket price? I mean, obviously the ticket prices are set by kind of the combination of both, but who is applying the tax?
Yeah, that's a great distinction to look at next. I will say on the grant side, it seems like from something I read from the UK government itself that these grants could start around £40,000 to give you a scale of the support per venue that they could end up doling out based on how much money they collect. But what's interesting about where the levy comes from is that right now, this hasn't been implemented. It certainly hasn't been mandated, but it hasn't been implemented across the board yet. This isn't a common thing, so there's not a lot of money coming in. But what has happened is that not only has this artist who's the subject of this piece in the Quietus decided to do it on his performances to add some money into this fund, but on the Liveline website, there are three major artists, major, who they cite as partners who have decided to do this on their tours. And they are Coldplay, Sam Fender, and Katy Perry. So like huge artists of this scale, huge global artists have decided to support this fund by adding this levy fee tax. And levy is probably the most pleasant word that you could use to run this concept on the tickets at their tour. And so it's starting to collect money through voluntary artist side decisions to implement it. Great. Now, looking ahead, they want it to happen across the board at all these 5,000 plus size shows. Yeah. And there's a quote in the Quietus piece. They also talk about how an overwhelming majority of music fans support it when they're polled about it, which, makes sense. Yeah. Because if you're answering a poll like that, yeah, you probably would, first of all. But also, I think, depending on how you talk about this concept, would surprise me that it's broadly popular. But somebody's quoted in the Quietus piece, and they say, "It is our hope that the live music industry adopts a model of contributions from arena and stadium tickets to support the Live Trust voluntarily before it is enforced on a government level." That's the quote. So we have early adopter artists who have chosen to be the good Samaritans here, charge it now, then maybe it gets more widespread. And if it doesn't, then maybe they'll have to mandate it, is kind of the vibe.
That's very interesting. Wow. Okay, so to summarize, really what we're getting is some artists are voluntarily applying this levy that goes into this fund for these big shows, like the 5,000 plus cap, many of which would actually probably be like more than 5. Because if you're at the 5,000, you're probably actually playing venues that are like even bigger than that, right? They're like the stadium shows. Like, so, there's a lot of money coming in potentially. And
because we could be 20 to 30,000. Yeah, the absolute highest could be.
Yeah, totally. And I'm not sure I'm sure there are plenty of venues that are kind of in that 5,000 range, but like really I'm thinking like once you're above 5K, you're not in like a small theater, you're probably in a stadium show. If not a huge stadium show, maybe just a medium size. And so the hit to the individual concert goer is not huge, but the potential impact to venues that are able to receive this funding is the potential benefits quite high.
Yeah, and let's be real. How expensive are some of these tickets going to be to these shows? What percentage of the overall out-of-pocket for the concert goer is $1? When you think about it that way, it's not a huge tax, is it?
No, yeah, exactly. I'm sure like a Coldplay tickets, could be like, £200, and maybe that's too lofty, 180, 200 pounds, something. And so an additional pound to be like, hey, there's music venues that might, be saved from completely collapsing if you pay this. Pretty good idea.
Yeah. Now they also bring up another example of what another country is doing. And I didn't know about this, but apparently the French government, and this is different from this flat $1 levy to a charity model. The French government collects a tax of 3.5% on most types of net ticket sales. So like ticket prices before VAT and all that stuff. Apparently the French government collects a percentage fee and then redistributes it similarly, but they administer something like that on ticket sales directly as opposed to like a flat $1 fee on shows of a certain size.
And they claim no venues in France have closed. I just have the article in front of me now that I'm skimming. That's I'm sure that cannot be right.
It's a big claim.
That's a really big claim.
Citation needed. And, maybe you could say like no venues in France have closed for lack of government funding. There must be. You got to close some venues. Yeah.
That is very interesting. What are your kind of thoughts on this? I know taxing end users isn't always your favorite way of solving a problem like this, but like, do you think this is an effective way of like getting to a desirable solution where venues are able to survive, or is it enabling venues maybe that just should figure out financial viability another way? Is this like a grant thing in your eyes?
Well, I do notice a theme because we talked about how one of the demands of anti-streaming advocacy is to grow the pot of money and basically tell Spotify, we don't think you're charging enough, first of all, because you're not adding enough money into the ecosystem, or like the flow of money is not voluminous enough because your subscription prices are really low. We think they should be higher. So we basically want to raise them by a certain amount, but we want to collect that extra vig and we want to decide what to do with it. So it's like, one, we don't believe you're charging enough to have enough money flowing through, and two, we think we know better what we would want to do with the money than what we think you want to do with it. And so we want to get out ahead of this, and we want to tax by 50% or however we talked about it in terms of the Living Wage for Musicians Act. I see this as being very similar because we have another thing to just turn the tap on a little bit more in terms of how much the concert goer's paying.
Yep.
But we want that extra vig. We want to decide what to do with it. We don't trust, and in this case, the boogeyman is Live Nation Ticketmaster. We don't trust you, what you would want to do with it, like what you do with the fees that you stipulate and you collect. We are going to withhold this in our trust, and we're going to redistribute it, not to artists in this case, like the Living Wage for Musicians Act, but to venues that we think have basically like strategic importance. They would talk about it as like, community hubs and important spaces, right, which there are, but strategically important in that if you think about the industry, there must be places like this for people like us. And honestly, because we spend most of our careers below this size, like to aspire to, but like to reasonably aspire to, as a goal for our projects, that if we're doing well, we can play places like this, and we want them to be healthy. So it's determining that that is your strategic priority, is that you want to support places like that. The overall VIG or tax is certainly smaller than like a 50% tax on Spotify subscriptions.
Yeah.
So I'm more comfortable with it. I don't know, honestly, how much money this fund is going to be able to collect. Like, yeah, you said, that could add up a lot, but will it really? I mean, if you're giving out 40 to 50K grants, those aren't enormous ticket grants. So I guess you would raise enough funds to dole out quite a few of those. And there aren't going to be a huge amount of venues that you really, really strategically want to support either. So it does seem pretty nicely targeted, especially at a UK level, like a geographically pretty small country when us two Canadians look at it. If you were to do this in Canada, I think it would be a lot harder, because you got more kind of regional politicking about where the funds would go. Like maybe a Canadian province, could entertain this idea, especially like a smaller geographic Canadian province, or, maybe Ontario. But I think UK is a good country for this. I think overall it's pretty targeted. As an experiment to run, I think it's quite interesting. How much is it going to move the needle? I don't know, because you're subsidizing in the face of rising costs, and that's dangerous, because when you do that, you could talk yourself into keeping doing it forever and ever, and you could continue to need more and more money for it, and then it could start to get pretty challenging. So that's my overall view of it, I guess, at this point, having discovered it through this article this week.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing with like when you're subsidizing amidst rising costs, right? Like if and when that subsidy ever goes away, then these venues are truly screwed, right? If these venues became dependent on, these fairly large, depending on, some of these venues are just like, even at that cap, maybe not like large enterprises, or certainly not large enterprises, but don't take a lot of money to run, and maybe aren't even active spaces. Like they're not like a bar or something. They're a dedicated music venue. It sounds actually like at this, if they're kind of talking about that, like roughly the 300 cap size or whatever, like the Wise actually is a great example of a venue like that.
Yes.
And the Wise has been in financial trouble. And I'm thinking about, when Taylor Swift was in town for the End of the Eras tour in Vancouver, like imagine if $1 of every Taylor Swift ticket went, let's just say nothing of 3.5% of all Taylor Swift ticket sales for the End of the Eras tour. If that went to the Wise, or like venues in Vancouver could apply for that, and based on merit, some arts council kind of doles that out for a few tens of thousands, would be really high impact. I like what you said about it being targeted as well, right? Like the size of the solution seems correct. The size of the correction here, like $1 per ticket or whatever, £1 per ticket, seems correct for the size of the problem. For the, they've identified like a subset of the types of venues that they'd like to keep going, even when they're having a hard time. Yeah, it is interesting. And I also like what you said about how this is kind of on theme with some other things we've been talking about, right? Where like there's kind of this dissatisfaction with the way that like the current market is operating, where in the Spotify case, the UMA is saying like, hey, we think this music, your money's not going to the right places and there's not enough of it, so like we're just gonna like grab some and redistribute it how we see fit. And I think there's been a trend, I don't have any numbers in front of me on this, that like people are going to bigger and bigger concerts, that like your average concert goer is actually going less to smaller venues. I'm not sure if that's true. It feels intuitively true. And I think, if there's like a Money for Nothing episode about this, about how the Live Nation Ticketmaster thing, about how big concerts are bigger than ever and like the small to mediums are having a harder time.
Yes.
Am I not off base? That's roughly accurate.
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, it's a concentration story, and there's a lot of those. So
yeah.
I also not knowing the real data, it's certainly something you hear people say a lot. I mean, the classic one for us in the recent years was like, oh, everybody going to the Eras tour and not coming out to the local venue kind of thing. You know? This is a common talking point.
Totally. And so if that is indeed the case, and, the UK, it's funny, you said smaller geography. I think the UK has like a lot more venues than any region in Canada, I would say. Like there's a density of live music venues. Just culturally, there's like people just like go out to see music quite a lot, and there's older towns and cities as well, and some historic venues and whatnot. So I could see this fund looking at that problem and saying like, okay, sure, people want to spend money to like go to see Coldplay. Tens of thousands of people are going to go see Coldplay. Like, how can we take some of that excitement and interest and like put that back into these what they call grassroots venues, and hopefully help those grassroots venues to thrive and in turn kind of become more viable and get more shows there, get more audience there.
Yeah, and I guess as the last consideration on it, I mean, I think that this is something where if you didn't carve out a new levy to fund it, I think it would be something that at some point people would demand to be funded out of general revenue, which I would much less prefer.
Right.
And when I think about things like that, what I think about is the British Columbia transit plebiscite in the early 2010s. Do you remember this, or were you in Smithers at this time?
I was probably in Smithers at the early part of that. What was that?
So, I mean, it was one of the worst referenda you could possibly imagine, because the question is basically like, do you want to add a new couple point tax onto like everything to fund this specific thing that you probably don't use very much? Yes or no? That was the question.
Right.
And I looked at it as a conservative teenager and I was like, yes, I do want this. And it's not just because I spend my life using transit. And I think if you look at TransLink, the transit authority here in Metro Vancouver's fiscal position today, I think you gotta wish that
it passed,
somehow. Yeah. I mean, there's no question in the world where you could get people to probably vote majority yes on that, but like they didn't create a new levy to fund that. And so TransLink has continued to be funded out of general revenue, and it is down bad because of that. And it's been sucking up more and more money because we didn't at a opportune time choose to fund it in a standalone
direct
way.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been to the credit of not only the users of transit, but everybody who is trying to get around in this region if we had decided to start a funding stream for the benefit of TransLink then, and we might be in a little bit of a better position than they've been in the last year or so and where they're going.
It's a good parallel. I was not around for that. Although some aspects, did they do another one of those when I had moved to Vancouver, like it's like 2013, 2014? Or am I thinking of the same thing?
I think I'm talking off the top of my head right now. I'm going to look up when exactly it was, but that 13, 14, I think that's when this was.
Oh, okay, so that I was here for that then. I do vaguely remember it, although I wasn't like very civically engaged because I was a new Vancouverite and worried about the modes of melodic minor and not how to bus places.
Okay, so it was in 2015.
Okay, so I definitely was here for that.
The mayor of Vancouver was current housing minister federally, Gregor Robertson. He was the mayor of Vancouver when this happened. But so Metro Vancouverites voted no in the plebiscite, and the vote was over 61% no, with under 1 million people voting. But still, that's a decent turnout, I suppose, but definitely a solid victory for the no, because when you ask people, do you want to pay an extra tax, yes or no, you're probably going to get no. But even though I am a conservative fiscally and I'm not interested in things like that, I think you have to be, because, you got to pay for stuff somehow.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to carve out a way to pay for it, you either got to kill it, which is, not always a good idea. Maybe sometimes it is, but not always. Or you have to figure out some other way to pay for it.
Huh. Well, here's hoping we can implement a levy on... if Infidels gets big enough, I'm going to be implementing a $1 levy on Fox Cabaret shows. That's going down the street to Redgate.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, something like the Fox, because they would be, if they needed it, they would be a model recipient of something like this. I wonder to what extent they need it. I wonder how many grants they already use from which sources, and I wonder how dire the situation is for them and how much they would need it. I mean, the Wise, it was funny that we opened with the Shorties, because obviously we understand that venue would need it because they've had to fundraise large amounts of money to stay alive over the last little while. Yeah. So interesting to think about like which venues would really, really need it.
Yeah, and the Fox maybe is an interesting counter case because it is a club after it does its like artsy, maybe less popular shows. And so like every weekend, I'm sure it just makes tons of money on liquor revenue and door sales when it like packs out every weekend, every night.
Yeah. So there's a spectrum probably of how much these venues need it that is not always obvious, because you don't know how much funding they need in the background. Maybe once in a while they pop up with a huge fundraising ask, and other than that, you don't really get a view into it.
Yeah. That's a cool model. I'm going to have to read this article more in depth after this. Thank you for sharing this.
Well, it is funny that I did just say the word spectrum, because the second thing we're talking about today, it also involves a spectrum of sorts. And this is another video that I sent to you that I'll run down for you. It is called Why Every, in all caps, Artist Should Be on YouTube. And it's by a YouTuber called John Talks Beats, who you are familiar with, and I was not before this video. So can you tell me about this YouTuber?
Yeah. John, this YouTuber, is a hip hop producer and rapper that releases music under the name John Wayne, all one word. Kind of in like, I believe the name of the genre was backpack rap at the time. That like, it was like kind of indie bedroom, kind of DIY rap music. And he's always been a prolific beat maker, and his kind of claim to fame was when he was rapping he was made all his own beats and his own raps, and he was always a very very solid producer and rapper. And I was this is around the Chill Evans days, right, like 2013 as we were just getting started, and like in the Reddit indie hip hop spaces, John Wayne was revered by these other white producers and rappers who were just like nerdy guys with Ableton. John was one of those, and now is like a great YouTuber and educator and talks about all sorts of music industry stuff, and also just like makes good beats on his YouTube channel. It's worth a watch.
Nice. So it maybe sounds like this is an extension of what he's known of, that this video is not in his historical bag. It's like an expansion.
Maybe he's kind of more doing think piece videos like this now. I think he's both like educational and like for younger producers and artists to be thinking about this kind of stuff, as well as beat making videos. He's kind of like an all around capital C content creator by now.
So he's right in there with two other people who we've mentioned on the show before, Digging the Greats and Ben Jordan, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Where like they've got their music thing, and as well as, being a internet personality. Yeah.
So this video talks about a bunch of things that we've talked about, the changing commercial environment, what impressions mean in terms of bottom line, like how fame doesn't equal money, talks about a frustration that creators feel with many platforms, as we've talked about. But I think the key thing about this video is that it sets up a spectrum of, on the left, discoverability platforms, his term for that side of the spectrum. And these are the platforms which have the greatest potential for the most impressions.
Right.
And on the right-hand side, what he calls profit platforms, which are the ones that have the greatest potential for sales. Now, his discovery platforms that he names and focuses on are TikTok and Instagram, and he also talks about music streaming as being one of them. And then the two profit platforms that he talks about are Bandcamp and Patreon.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, as we unpack this video together, does this spectrum resonate with how you have already been looking at this topic?
I think 100%. And I mean, it kind of lines up with stuff we've said before, which is like, do what you want as far as like TikTok and Instagram. I think, it's a bit of a slot machine. I would say I'm a little more cynical to call any of those like high discoverability or high, ranking quite highly on your likelihood of being discovered is maybe disingenuous because, as we've talked about on like the Big Things Coming article and whatnot, like it's still, your odds are slim. You should not be dependent on that type of thing and focus on other ways of finding people. But as far as these online platforms go, yes, right, there is that slot machine, and if it hits, you can reach a bunch of people that you would never reach normally. And if you're making high quality content, you will reach people that you can't have access to, and it's kind of your top of the funnel stuff, right? In the normal like sales thinking, right? Where you're casting this really wide net. You want all these people at the top of the funnel, and then how would you get them, funnel them down into a Patreon or a Bandcamp so that they actually want to support you?
Yes, and that is what he cites as the biggest, and it's a familiar frustration that creators are feeling now more than ever with discoverability platforms, which is that when it comes to their audience, they can't get them over, in John's words, to the profit platforms, or figure out how to build that critical mass over on the right-hand side in the profit area by whatever means they have to, because the discovery platforms are walled gardens more and more and more year on year, and therefore the funnel doesn't really function. And so then it makes sense that he's aligned it as a horizontal spectrum as opposed to matching it as a funnel, because the familiar thing that he's citing is that this is not a functional funnel that you can repeatedly use to build an audience on the discoverability side and then bring it over to the profit side. There isn't a repeatable path through that now. You could say there never was. You could feel that there was in the past, but right now there isn't a repeatable path through that.
Yes. He talks about the trend of, I don't know if you've seen this, but I certainly have, where a band will post the same video, like the same 20 seconds of their song, maybe with a slightly different video, like 20 different times. So like their Instagram reels are just like, it's kind of depressing to see because they're just hitting the slot machine over and over and over again, being like, maybe this will hit, or maybe they had one hit with that sound, that 20 seconds of their song, and they still have to keep promoting their single. And they're like, well, that worked. And so, at these desperate efforts to convert traffic or to kind of hit the jackpot again, it doesn't work like that. That's not a good use of your time on those platforms.
Yeah, and one angle he then continues toward is that people's consumption intent, I guess, is a key part of what's going on here. And he talks about it through his own experience as a consumer, not as a creator, where he and the other people that he imagines, and is kind of square of me to talk about this in the third person because maybe I don't, I've been lucky enough to avoid this for some reason, but he talks about people, you go to the discoverability platforms just to be entertained in general, not to develop attachment to any creator scrolling.
Yeah.
You go there, you can't even remember what you saw later if you were asked about when you scroll, because you just consume it and then you just let it go. And that doesn't facilitate you going down anybody else's funnel.
Right. 100%. And these platforms are specifically built to stop anything that were to take you down the funnel, right? Like if you were to see something that's so good that makes you like, oh, hang on, I'm going to like not flip to the next reel in my feed or whatever. that will be downgraded in the algorithm because everyone who watches it has left the app to go check something out or subscribe to a Patreon or something. So like, it's 1000% antithetical to what you kind of hope would happen there. Like it's the opposite is being incentivized here. These like smooth experiences that would not at all prompt you to leave the app and subscribe to someone or find their Patreon.
Totally. And this is a familiar side of the issue for us. Now, what he isolates as an antidote is interesting. And this is where you get to fulfilling the title and the promise of the video, because he says, you look at this spectrum, you can position YouTube in a happy middle of this spectrum.
Yeah.
Because people who consume a lot of YouTube, they come with the intent to know individual creators. And that makes it easier. Not even just the mechanics of like clicking out of a YouTube video description is kind of easier than leaving Instagram or whatever, but just that philosophically, the intent that you approach YouTube with makes it easier to send people over to a profit platform from YouTube than from any other place. And when you combine that with YouTube's still high discoverability potential, it has an advantage over so many other platforms and is arguably the place to be. And that is his contention in this video.
It resonates with me overall as true for maybe a couple different reasons. The first, you first sent me this video and the title of it, and my first thing that I thought was like, I think that's right. Just from the title itself, I wrote it should be on YouTube because of my experience of using YouTube. And this is maybe a little bit less the case. YouTube's algorithm is weird. That doesn't mean that it's like bad, but it's certainly not doing what, say, TikTok or Instagram do, where if you use Instagram enough, it like gets quite good at just showing you things, that like smooth experience, right? It's like shows things you're like, okay, yeah, this is like roughly what I like to look at. It's entertaining. It's very frictionless, slippery experience, maybe to use some of the terms from like Filter World or whatever. Nothing sticks, nothing jumps out at you. It's just very smooth. And YouTube's recommendations are often weird. Famously, like this used to be more the case maybe 5-10 years ago. You'd see in the YouTube comments being like, I don't know how I ended up here, but like this is my favorite song now, or like videos, hour-long video essays about obscure, movies or lost media or whatever can thrive on YouTube. And I think it's that the algorithm is just like tuned for slightly different things, and the average YouTube consumer can spend a little more time. Like this longer form content obviously is incentivized. In fact, there's been this problem. I think some creators have said that like you now need longer and longer and longer videos, and that's why you see like video essays now going to like an hour or two. So that first to me is like, it just seems, if not more fair, weirder in ways that could be helpful if you were a creator that's like kind of unknown and looking to grow some discoverability.
Yeah, so we are creating on YouTube. I think the reason for that is just the practicality of how we shoot this show and what the most logical destination for it is.
Yep.
Like, we're not creating this show to be cut up into a bunch of clips. In fact, we've never cut any clips so far. We might in the future, but we've never bothered to because it's not like the core mode that we've been recording it.
We need more
creating.
Zingers. I think we got to be just lots of zingers to turn into clips.
Yeah, we need to isolate more takes as we go through so that we can, we need to produce that better, don't we?
Yeah, exactly.
So we're already bought in. We're already on YouTube. We're already creating there. So this isn't necessarily for us. It's not something that we need to be talked into. This could be something for a music artist. Yes. And that could be kind of a weird, non-obvious path. If you're like, oh, this artist, what would it look like for them to suddenly apply this and be like, okay, I have to be on YouTube more. What would they do? What would that mean they do less of? And what would they do more of on YouTube itself? I mean, I think it could apply to other kinds of creators too, like people who post producery stuff on Instagram,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me as like, okay, this could be who this is for and who needs to hear this, because people who post producery stuff on Instagram, we think about, okay, give that all the reach that it could possibly have and deserve. What next?
Yeah.
How do you capitalize on that or make the most of that? It's hard to do because it's a walled garden, and that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So totally get it that those kind of people, creating on YouTube deserves to be part of the habit. 100% producery people on YouTube do really well, and they have been for over a decade, right? So that's there. In terms of being a music artist or some kind of artist, what does it mean? What do you have to, if you wanted to do this, if you heard this, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. YouTube sounds like the place to be. What would you have to start doing less of on the classic discoverability platforms? And he even put streaming in there too, right?
Right.
What would you have to do less of over there? And what would you have to do more of on YouTube? Like, what would this look like? That's an interesting question for me now.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be, think of maybe like the most successful example of this, also tied into high profitability, Jack Conte and his band Pomplamoose. If you're not familiar, like that's Jack Conte is the founder or creator and founder of Patreon, but has a band called Pomplamoose. What was his older project called? Are you familiar?
Well, he has done another project called Scary Pockets. I don't know where that falls the timeline.
Yeah, Scary Pockets is the one I was thinking of. And this is maybe impractical advice, but like that is maybe the 10 out of 10 like logical extension of, these are they have like live recordings, really beautifully shot and produced videos of them playing live. It's very like quote unquote like music YouTube. Like I think their audience are often other musicians or just music fans who like seeing really skilled, it sounds great. There's a big focus on tone, big focus on vibe, like aesthetically, visually. I think, obviously a thing that a smaller or newer artist would focus on is just like adding a visual element to this music that they already have recorded, right? Like, we've talked about this before, but YouTube is the largest streaming platform in the world. We talk about Spotify all the time. That's like a North American centric thing, and I guess UK as well. But like YouTube is a much, 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 much bigger streaming platform because it's free. And so, if you were to look at traffic in like Brazil, which has like a huge percentage of people who are listening to music, or like, other countries in the global south, YouTube is the only place some people get music. And so at the very least, like having a visual element just so you are like have a tiny little bit of algorithm bait, like I think maybe still images, the default like DistroKid just putting your album art over your song maybe isn't helping you that much, but figuring out, a low effort, low cost way to like shoot something, make some content of yourself talking and, maybe talking about a song, playing something live, experiment like you would with any other platform. But I think it intuitively feels true that it's like an easier or a more hooky way to get fans than, say, Instagram.
I agree with you, of course. When an artist does something like this and they come to the point where they have an objection and they're like, well, I started creating on YouTube now, but YouTube is a terribly ineffective place versus what I used to have right at my fingertips on Instagram to plug my upcoming shows and get people to come out. What do we tell them at that point then?
I think it's just two different things, right? I actually think for you, I was thinking about this as we were talking earlier too, that YouTube should be for kind of a different type of, I hate to use all these tech business terms, customer acquisition, like a different type of customer acquisition, right? When you're posting on your Instagram, these are people who are following you and actually already care about what you're doing. And your YouTube would be for people who have no context for you, and you're being shown in the recommendations feed and maybe to someone in Brazil, maybe to someone across the world, who's seeing you and likes your music, and, link in the description. And you're trying to, I think once you get one hit, YouTube's recommendation algorithm is pretty good at like showing you more from that artist later, like when you upload more. I think there's a consistency thing with YouTube. I'm not, but besides this podcast, which like I don't see any numbers on or anything, I'm not a YouTube creator, so I can't claim to know like what, you know, how much the consistency matters, like everyone says it does. But you know, that higher effort could mean you don't have to be posting as much exactly, and you have to think about it differently than, it's not the platform to say like, hey, I'm going to be playing at the Wise Hall next week.
No, because there's a time-bound thing on other discoverability platforms in this framework that doesn't apply to YouTube, and people call that evergreen content and people call it other things, but it's not as much of a place for timely things for the vast majority of creators, unless you're doing daily stuff and you're all in and you're like a full-on YouTuber, you know, then you're riding that wave every single day. But if you're not one of those all in creators, you are not going to be doing a lot of timely stuff on YouTube. That's not what you're going to be rewarded for by the platform. That's not what it's for.
Yeah. YouTube also has, to go back to the algorithm being a little weird, I've noticed this, and I'm not sure it's ever done this to you. I use YouTube Premium because
Same.
The ads, I could not live with the ads, and I do like using YouTube Music to, like, you know, have DJ sets. I don't have to see the video for. I can just be playing that while I work. YouTube, if I'm sometimes saying like not watching much, or you know, I've kind of not been engaged, I will sometimes open the YouTube app and it will show me stuff instead of like my usual recommendations of like, here's like the podcast I watch, or here's, you know, stuff I usually would check out, stuff from like 13 years ago. It will just start being like, okay, pull out the big guns. Here's a really weird video essay you might like, or like, you know, a meme video from like that I watched maybe. Sometimes it's stuff that I like remember having seen years ago, and it goes like, hey, you remember you liked this? And sometimes it's totally random. Like, it will really shake things up. So if you're a creator, it's not a terrible idea to just have that stuff on there. I think you've got stuff on your YouTube channel, right, that you've like got for like excavation purposes, and you know, you can eventually randomly get scooped out of there, and that's the, you know, that's also in those infamous YouTube comments of like, I don't know why this video from 8 years ago is being recommended to me, but like, I love this song, or I love this thing. You know, I've certainly found stuff that way where I don't understand why, but like the recency effect on the algorithm doesn't seem to be as strong, or at least the algorithm is more effective at just like grabbing old stuff. Or maybe it's just an algorithm that kind of works badly, and that's a good thing. Like, at the end of the day, I think that's like, there's something to be said for that maybe in some ways Instagram and TikTok are a little bit too good or too smooth.
So one day it's going to be enshittified.
Enshittified by getting too good. I don't know. I mean, it works for YouTube, right? I don't think like Google's focused on AI stuff. I think what will be enshittified is one day everything in your feed will just be AI generated by, you know, what is their new model called? Veo 3. And you won't be able to tell what's actually real and what's just been like purpose built. You know, am I just watching like AI Ben Jordan, or is this the real guy?
Yeah, it's already happening to some extent, so we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, can't wait for YouTube slop era.
My sign off on this topic is John forgot one of the most important profit platforms, and starts with an E. You know what it is?
Profit platform with an E? No.
Email.
Oh yeah, Substack. Because I was going to think about newsletter, Substack, or whatever. Definitely.
Yeah, Substack would deserve mention on its own at this point, I guess, because it's such a brand. But like, that's the original and is still the strongest profit platform is email. And so you combine that with YouTube, you can do a lot, probably.
Didn't Substack, sorry, this is now a tangent, but didn't Substack say, did you see this report that they did their earnings? And they said they think there are like 50 people making over $1 million a year on Substack. I don't know if it was 50. That seems crazy. But they were like, I
mean, I could buy that. I think so. I think it could be that large, depending on, you know, how much they charge. You know, that could be 10,000 paid subscribers for some people, or slightly less. So, you know, that's not an unthinkable amount.
More than 50 people a year.
Creators.
I just found the article on The Verge. Yeah, more than 50 people a year making over $1 million on Substack, which is a lot of money on a platform.
You know what else is a lot of money is that means that Substack is making over $100,000 a year from those creators, ARR.
Yeah. And to say nothing of the people who are just shy of $1 million, though, like 800,000 or whatever. I'm sure that's like the meat and potatoes of Substack's business. That's crazy.
The funny thing, though, about Substack is that because they're a VC funded growth company, they are always working the knife's edge. Like that's why they've built out all these other platform features, and they're trying to be a discoverability style platform too. Even if they're not optimizing for discoverability, they're copying the traits of some of those platforms and adding it into Substack when nobody asked for them at any point. So it's funny to see existentially how they deal with that.
Maybe we can have a Substack versus Ghost vibe check on another episode, because I know you made that transition at some point. Were you ever on Substack?
I was.
Yeah.
It was very brief.
Right.
But
okay.
yes, I in the grand scheme of things, it was very brief. But I have used it, and I'm a customer of Ghost right now. So there's a conversation we had there about subscription platforms and what you're looking for. I mean, it's not as interesting at this point about like, oh, which one's going to win. Because like you can't imagine Substack taking a dominant market share in profit platforming. Email is always going to be a part of this world, and there's always going to be competitors to it. So it's not, the stakes are not as high. But yeah, Substack they have a playbook that is different than everybody else's, it seems, because they're like the most hungry for capital, the most hungry for growth in a way that a lot of these other ones aren't.
Yeah. Man, I just got really upset and bummed out that, like, thinking about how email is just still king in my job, and in like cybersecurity in general, email is just like, you want to shake your fist because it's like, it's still on top. Everything you can do to say, like, let's move it all to Slack, let's change all business communication. Email is old and insecure and broken, and it's built like a rickety, shantytown house. It's still king. It's still like the way people get information in general, which is nuts on the internet. When there's a lot of better alternatives, but man, Substack. One day.
Yeah, Substack is tied. It's hitched its wagon to email for the time being. Yeah, maybe that's the whole thing. Maybe when email deprecates further and further, maybe they're stepping in and they're providing something. But yeah, no, they have hitched their wagon to the platform of email.
I don't think email is going anywhere, unfortunately, and I don't think there's any way to fix it. I think we're stuck with it. I think yeah.
Well, I'm pretty bought into it. So in terms of my own work and my clients, so that's okay with me.
That's great. You hitched yourself to the right wagon there.
Yeah. All right. Do you have a recommendation for this week?
I do have a recommendation for this week. There's a band called Caroline. I believe they're from the UK, and their first album was self-titled Caroline. That was really good. Also worth checking out. But the recommendation is for the sequel. Their sophomore album is called Caroline 2, aptly named, and worth a listen. It's kind of like post-rock. I think they're an octet. So there's quite a few of them. They've got like elements of noise. There's folk stuff. One of the 8 members is violin. There's some kind of Americana elements. It's really nice. Good post-rock band.
So you're telling me that last week you recommended an album called 2, and now you are recommending an album called Caroline 2.
See how long I can keep this up.
Well played. So we're going double music this week because I've got one too. This is probably going to be something that I end up covering at Rhythm Changes, or at least I better. So it's going to appear there at some point too. But gotta tell you about it now. You should figure out if there's a way where you can get your hands on this vinyl, because this is an outstanding album. It's a band that has been a big live band in town for a few years now in the scene, Empanadas Ilegales, and they just put out an album called, I'm probably going to butcher it in Spanish, Sancocho Trifásico, and they had their album release party at the Hollywood Theater with support from another Latin band of friends called Midnight Boogaloo. I didn't get to go. I was at a different show. But this album is awesome. This is one of the best bands, you know, that touches the jazz scene. Obviously, it's bigger than that because they're playing like cumbia music, psychedelic cumbia thing that they're playing off of. But this band is one of the bands that could come out of our community and conquer the world. And this album is really awesome. And it's one of my favorite albums of the year so far. And it comes from here. So I got to shout them out here too.
I love that. I will check that out. Up my alley for sure.
Yeah. All right. So because we're in the adventurous month of June here, you're going to be going places and I'm going to be doing stuff here at the Jazz Fest. The next time that we drop an episode, it could look a little bit different. It could be something a little bit different. We're going to take a break in a little while too, but not just yet. As far as right now, we're all systems go for an episode next week. So I look forward to seeing you when we go to record that. And I hope you have a great weekend.
I hope you do too. Great chat and talk soon.